how far and how high they can go. This is unlimited in the Azores. So the discussion with us is really to go above 100 kilometers in altitude, 120, 200. This is currently the numbers that we're discussing.
Hello, my name is Bruno Carvalho. Welcome to Urania TV. Today we talk with Bruno Carvalho, the CEO of Atlantic Spaceport Consortium, about launching the Polish rocket Perun from the Azores. Let's talk rocket science.
Yeah, so I would start probably go right to the questions because we don't have much time. And from what I've heard, you are working with SpaceForest and other companies that specialize in some kind of modular or maybe hybrid rocketry. So the question will be that what are the benefits, like financial, operational, and in terms of scaling of mobile launch pads compared to the permanent launch pads for mostly suborbital campaigns, such as Perun or other sounding rockets?
So there's three questions in that question.
Yeah. Basically, we're talking about what's better in mobile launch pads for the case of suborbital campaigns.
Okay, so let's start from the beginning and provide a bit of context here so that we can all be on the same page. Is that okay? So the Atlantic Spaceport Consortium was set up to address the access to space market, so the spaceport development, and the what's it called, the bottleneck that is spaceport availability. Okay, so this was back in 2018. There's been some studies in the Azores before that. The European Space Agency, from even University of Austin, some NASA, and some Portuguese entities involved. And we reached the conclusion that this would be a decent place to do a spaceport. Obviously, this is a small island. That means small rockets, and small rockets means let's start small. Let's start with atmospheric launches, which we did some in 2024. Then let's move to suborbitals, and eventually we'll move to orbital. And we already have contracts in place for orbital launches as well. These will be capped in terms of, I'd say, payload capabilities, not necessarily because of size. This has to do with I would say, different technologies have different capacity, different performance in terms of orbital range. But that means also that we are more limited by the safety radius and safety distances that we can define on the island other than a specific technology. But also because of that we've been very picky in terms of the technologies we're bringing to the island for two reasons. One is simplicity of operation, and this is where people like SpaceForest have a word in the development of those technologies, like hybrid rockets, that minimize the handling of things like cryogenics or biliquid propellants and dangerous goods, right? So you split the solids and paraffin inert materials, and then the oxidizer into a liquid or a gas, whatever. So the business case and the business model that we built, and this has been, I would say, privately invested since the very beginning. We've had some small support from the agencies, but most of the work has been commercial or privately funded. And the way we created the business model is precisely to address those points that you mentioned. So it has to do with cadence. So how many flights do we need to actually operate from the site in order to generate revenue and break even, and then grow some profit on top of that. And the way we found the path we found was to use mobile launch pads, mobile facilities, temporary infrastructure, that would require a minimum upfront investment in order to justify the mission, right? So if you need to have a massive infrastructure and spend 10 or 20 million to build a pad, then this is not going to work for us because we don't have that money, but also because we need to prove that the site is reliable, that the location is good from an operational point of view, and that there is actually a rocket that wants to launch from there. In Europe, unfortunately, there's none ready. Okay, so if you remove Ariane 6 and Vega, and hopefully ISAR in the near future, there's none ready. Okay, so this is also why we signed with Innospace from Korea, because they've launched from Brazil already, both suborbital and orbital. They had a mishap on the orbital, but they are getting back to the pad soon, and they will be launching orbital with us next year. We're actually preparing the data pack for the licensing request for them. So the approach from the Atlantic Spaceport Consortium has really been a stepped approach to this process, to minimize risk for us in terms of our own, I'd say, investment, but also to minimize risk for the island itself. I mean, we have to be careful in terms of environment, in terms of safety. There's population around, there are protected areas and maritime protected areas, and so on and so forth. Then obviously on the flip side of that, there are clear advantages. We have a massive ocean in front of us. If you take off to the south, the first piece of land that you find is Antarctica, and you are 36 degrees north. So you really have the whole ocean in front of us. So these kind of pros and cons led us to the current situation and the current business case, and actually led to the work we're doing with SpaceForest, which we hope that we will be able to launch during the summer. We're also waiting for the licensing to be sorted out.
Okay, to summarize, basically now we are in this stage of getting everything up and running with mobile systems as fast as possible to generate basically flight heritage, which allows for further scaling, yeah?
And some revenue, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, the trick here, and this also has to do with how you feed the final plan and the incremental construction into the actual layout of the site and the actual planning permissions and so on and so forth. There is also a regulatory part to force us into the situation, but the main issue is really the business case around it and the level of investment that we can do with the mobile infrastructure versus a more permanent infrastructure.
Okay, so my next question was, how do you compare to places like Urania, for example? But in your previous answer, you already gave it an answer. So thanks for that. So I would say the next question is that I wanted to ask, we are obviously, as a Polish rocketry team, heavily invested into what's going on with Perun. Could you give us a glimpse into the processes which are already in place, and what's the timeline of this project? If you can, obviously.
I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer to that. And I'm sure that you have contacts with SpaceForest that you can potentially tap into. And happy to provide those emails and phone numbers for you to chase them. For us, this came about through the European Space Agency. So this is framed under the boost contract that they have with the agency. The Portuguese Space Agency decided to help them out and bring them to the Azores. So they're funding our contribution, and we are investing to bring them over. So there's a Portuguese investment to bring SpaceForest to the country. This is paying out, and I think this is something that we will see how. I mean, the aim for SpaceForest is to really create a repeat business, right? So a recurring business, and the only way they have to do that is to really be in a situation where they can launch the Perun as many times as possible and as many times as they are contracted to do so commercially. And they want to make it a commercially viable product. They've launched a couple of times in Ustka. That is the problematic location in terms of being a military range, but also because they capped into how far and how high they can go. This is unlimited in the Azores. So the discussion with us is really to go above 100 kilometers in altitude, 120, 200. This is currently the numbers that we're discussing. The regulatory framework in Portugal requires, I would say, it doesn't require, but it encourages, which is helpful for us, but encourages a licensing process for the suborbitals as well. But once you do that once, then the recurring business is quicker. The license enables us to then sort things out like liability insurance and all that stuff that needs to be sorted out, because if you don't have a license, it's always considered an experimental vehicle, and that creates another sorts of issues. So we need to reach a point where the vehicle is also considered with enough heritage to be a repeat business. So what we're offering to SpaceForest is a location where they can do that repeat business to higher altitudes, and that means more minutes in microgravity. That means more experiments can be flown into Perun. So the timeline we have now, we do plan a launch during the summer. The final date is not defined yet, and this is pending a few things, including the licensing to be issued by the Portuguese authorities, which should expect that in middle of July. So my expectation is that around the second half of July we'd have that license, and then we'd be able to set a firm dates for a launch. There's a bit of a tricky situation to handle with regards to logistics, because we need to get everything on the island. We have not done that before we actually got the license. We don't want to put the cart in front of the horses, as the British expression goes. But this is the situation. So we are moving forward.
Okay. You mentioned a series of launches in terms of SpaceForest. Are you assuming that we can expect a series of launches from Azores this summer, or is it going to be a single-time event?
I mean, this is public. They have contracted other spaceports or other solutions to launch this year. This is again in the development phase of Perun. So this is with the EuRoC. So there is two things that need to happen before that recurring business occurs. One is to prove the reliability of the rocket and recover it successfully multiple times. So I think recovering it going higher than ever, because they've never, I think the highest altitude they achieved was something like 30 or 40K. Going higher, recovering it further away, then obviously this needs to happen as well. So that is something that is part of the development phase that they have with the European Space Agency, but I do expect that to be a recurring event. So our relationship and our investment in this project, because we are, as I said, spending some money with us as well, is based on having an actual business case with them and going to fruition in terms of the recurring development. But I think this is also public. I mean, the SpaceForest has made some announcements on that, and they are actually marketing the Perun as for microgravity quite aggressively.
Yes, they sure are. My question was whether we can expect multiple launches from SpaceForest from Azores this summer.
I hope so, and we're having conversations in that direction, but we need to do it once first.
Okay.
So right now, I would like to go back to the topic, because you mentioned some Koreans in no space that you are facilitating them. So both of them, Koreans and the SpaceForest, are utilizing hybrid rockets.
Correct.
For their missions. So how are you in the spaceport preparing for it? Like the storage of oxidizers, handling it, delivering it to the island, and long-term operations with the propellants? That's
a good question. I mean, as I mentioned in the beginning, we've selected hybrids on purpose. I think if you look at the spaceport panorama in Europe, and the technologies that are being developed, so all of the European developers, all the European launchers being developed, is look ISAR, RFA, Latitude, Sirius, Maya, Skyrora. I'm missing a few probably. These are all bi-liquid propellants, and they are all more or less similar solutions. I think the exception there is probably Skyrora, where they have a kerosene peroxide solution, which is also potentially interesting for us in terms of simplicity, because they don't require cryogenics. But all the others require cryogenics. So then we turn to the hybrids, and you have in Europe SpaceForest, of course. Then you also have high impulse in hyperspace. And we've been working on and off with them. And then you have Innospace, the Koreans that you mentioned. So what we perceive in the market is that all these launchers and the engineering decision to go for these technologies is normally based on performance, right? So it's how small can I make my rockets and how performant can I make my rockets to minimize cost in orbit, right? So at the end of the day, performance is mass per kilo, kilo per mass in orbit, right? So a price per kilo in orbit. And that means that if you put more mass in orbit, you can reduce the price per kilo. But at the same time, we, as a spaceport operator, we have the perception that there are hidden costs and hidden overheads in operating some of these vehicles in some locations. So the overhead to operate a bi-liquid propellant vehicle is much higher than operating an hybrid vehicle. Why? Because you need to have, if you have methane LOX, you have two cryogenic gases and two cryogenic systems and all the handling that needs to go with that, plus the logistics to get on site, plus the price of oil these days. So all of that has a significant discussion to happen. So this is why we selected the hybrids to start with. We're not discarding supporting bi-liquid propellants in the future, but for now we're supporting the hybrids because this simplifies the operation on the island and simplifies the logistics that you're just saying. So it's much easier to handle a container of LOX because that is delivered to hospitals every day, and you have Air Liquide, Gasin, and other big players supplying LOX to everywhere in the world, and standardized containers that we can handle. So for the quantities that we need, and then you have the solid propellant that is inert, and you can put it in a container and ship it, and even produce it on the island if necessary. So that implies that and this is something that it's our perception, and this is based on our studies. We cannot validate this without having a recurring operation, but the business case for us means that we expect that even if you have a slightly lower performance on the hybrid vehicles, that the price per kilo in orbit should be the same or better if for the bi-liquid propellants from our spaceport. Why? Because we're simplifying operations. The reason why I'm saying this is that if I do pricing for a campaign of an hybrid versus a pricing of a campaign of a bi-liquid propellant, I know how much it will affect me in terms of operational costs. And obviously I would have to pass along to the vehicle provider, and I have to pass along, and they would have to pass that along to the payload end customer. So we need to validate this. And unfortunately, the market is not yet consolidated enough so that we can start to have price comparison between these rockets, and not all of them will survive for sure. Particularly in Europe, I don't think all of them will survive. And then to answer Pavel's question is that we are not positioning ourselves to compete with Kourou. We are positioning ourselves to complement Kourou. So the bi-liquids, they can go to the diamond pad and to the small launcher pads that they're building, like PLD is doing, like Maya is doing, like Latitude and others. And the last one to announce was actually, I think, Sirius as well. What we are doing is complement that offering, like Andoy is supporting ISAR, and like SpaceForest is supporting RFA and Skyrora now that Orbex is bankrupt. But the idea behind this is to have multiple options for these vehicles, and we deliberately did not select one winner. So we are really looking into the commercial part of this and building infrastructure as they come. So coming back to the first point in terms of having mobile infrastructure also for the orbitals for now, and maybe for the orbitals not much mobile, but it's definitely temporary infrastructure. So we're gonna do an orbital launch with something that will be adjusted to the final layout and final architectural and civil engineering works after that.
I have a question. So obviously, handling of hybrids and solids is much easier than liquids. And you mentioned a lot of propellants, but my question is, do you, as a spaceport, have any let's say, interest in promoting green propellants comparing to traditional compositions? And
Yes.
do you have any interest in banning some of the propellants as American spaceports are doing in some cases?
So yes and yes. So and actually we have other constraints that are imposed on us by the regulators. So I'll give you an example. We are not allowed, and honestly, I don't want to deal with things like hydrazine. So this is not just an impact on the launchers, but also on the payload providers. Okay, so if there's a satellite on board, a rocket that's going to be launched from the Azores that has hydrazine, probably will not be allowed, not even to be licensed to do it. So that means that us, from a sustainability point of view, but also from a legal perspective, regulatory framework, we need to monitor and foster the green propellants, whatever the green means here, but green propellants. I must say that if you look at the designs from high impulse and inner space, they do have a second stage with biliquid. So there's a second stage on both rockets. And there are other hybrids that are looking into biliquid propellants for second stage. This has to do with performance, but the thing there is that it's smaller quantities, so it's not massive amounts. It's in the hundreds of kilograms instead of tens of tons of propellant. That means that handling, say 100, 300 kilos of methane is much different than handling 30 tons of methane. So, so that's the rationale here. Now, us as a spaceport, and also because of the region where we are inserted, which has, I mentioned, has some environmental constraints, we do need to look into that. So sustainability, even in the long run, it's something that we need to incorporate in our business model from the beginning. And
okay, so obviously in terms of SpaceForest is paraffin, but when it comes to propellants using liquids, it would technically be easier to send the rockets using HTP or ethane compared to traditional propellants from your spaceport, essentially.
Yeah, and this is again why we are being selective on the vehicles that we bring into the site. And I can tell you that HTP is a good example. We were we were involved, and we still are involved in discussions with a rocket vehicle that uses HTP. Although for now they're still using kerosene, but they actually have some interesting variations of kerosene that they could use. The environmental consideration for those type of rockets is also interesting. If you're using, say, kerosene HTP, kerosene is used in airplanes, right? So Santa Maria, the island, has a massive airport, and if you compare because this question is asked to us even by the locals in terms of environmental impact, and we can compare a kerosene HTP rocket or any other rocket with CO2 equivalent and all that stuff, and we do some comparison with the operation of the airport, the operation of the port, and and how much are you adding in terms of pollutants to the island as such. And we see the impact of having 20, even if we are operating in full capacity, which is probably around 20 launches a year, maybe less, you're still producing like 1% of the airport operation, or even less than that when compared to the port operation. We had an example with another suborbital where we went to ask for kerosene to the local provider, and they said, okay, how much kerosene do you need? And we said, well, 300 kilos. And I said, 300 kilos, you can take those 3 buckets over there because, why? Because they used to feed 23 tons of kerosene into the wings of the A320 when it takes off from Santa Maria. So for them, it's in the noise, let's put it that way. From an environmental perspective, the impact is, when you compare it to other large-scale operations like the airport and the port, we're not in the noise because obviously there's an impact, but it's a minimal impact, and that is part of the work that we also need to do, and it's just to demystify what is the local impact and the sustainable impact and the environmental impact of the spaceport in a region like that. And we can see across the globe other spaceports where people were, those spaceports were challenged from, I don't know, fisheries or nature protection, whatever. And you see that in some cases, you can see good examples of having a positive impact on nature. And I'll give you two. One is Cape Canaveral. So you have more alligators in Cape Canaveral marshes than if you go to elsewhere in Florida. But also in Japan, in Tagashima, the island there is now a nature reserve. It has always been a nature reserve, but because now it's less access to people, nature actually is more prevalent there than before the spaceport arrived, like 20 years ago. So that is a I would say a communication problem that sometimes we have to make sure that we can pass the message, the proper message. And it's not just about pollution. We've done the same exercise for noise, for vibrations, and people worried about windows being broken and things like that. And the Concorde landed on that island. It was a lot louder than the rocket is for much longer, because you have takeoff, landing. I mean, the rocket, 30 seconds after the launch, it's gone. We compare that to a Taylor Swift concert, and you see that it registers on the seismographer. So you have 2.5 hours of 2.3 Richter scale earthquake in Seattle for Taylor Swift. You Google it, Taylor Swift earthquake in Seattle, and it's amazing.
Yeah, it is quite a scale, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that's for 2.5 hours. It's not a 30-second window, right? And the noise levels that we produced are probably below Taylor Swift's concert, but or a hard rock concert. I don't know. I'm partial to hard rock myself, but
okay.
But yeah, so this is part of the, I'd say, demystification that we have to do with the regulator, with particularly the local people that are concerned about this, and we have some people against the project, of course. I mean, it's part of the thing.
Okay, so when we get into past all of the hurdles of launching a rocket and it finally launches and it's all successful, what are the capabilities of the spaceport for telemetry, tracking of the rocket, because that's important, and then recovery? This recovery probably will be from water, because it's an island and we have a lot of ocean, which allows for over the ocean trajectories. So for example, Perun or other rockets may land hundreds of kilometers from the shore. How are you prepared to facilitate such operations, or do the launch providers need to bring their own equipment to get telemetry?
No. So for the recovery, we are handling that locally, and the Azores have one advantage there, is because they actually have a nice boat, ship fleet in terms of logistics, both from let's say goods transportation. So the islands need to be fed, so they're fed by container ships, and goods need to arrive to those islands. And to be honest, one or two containers from SpaceForest or another provider not going to make massive impact on those freighters. So that's one point. So getting to the island is relatively easy from the point of view. The same to get out of the island. So you pack everything else, you put it in containers and you ship it back. You can also take things to the island from with an airplane, a cargo plane, whatever, freight plane. On the recovery element, we have two types of recovery: the big stuff and the small stuff. The small stuff, things like the Perun rocket, will be recovered with fast boats and semi-rigid boats. And the Azores have, we're taking advantage of something that the Azores have, which is whale watching companies and maritime touristic companies. So these are 20-person fast semi-rigid boats that can tow a rocket or even put the rocket into the main deck. They are actually quite big boats. And this has the advantage of working with local partners. We actually encourage the local economy with this setup. For the bigger stuff, because we are also supporting re-entry missions, so people like Atmos, SpaceForge, and others that are re-entering. And I mean SpaceForge, not SpaceForest. I always confuse the two, and the third one is SpaceForce, which is the US stuff, and confusing names. But re-entry missions like Atmos, who got their first license to actually re-entry in the Azorean waters earlier this year, SpaceForest is going to start testing their heat shield and recovery operations on the island towards the end of the year. And the Atlantic Spaceport Consortium is also supporting those activities. And again, this is piggybacking on local capacity. Local capacity, I mean, they have a big fishing industry, and so there's boats with cranes, boats with ships, and the infrastructure is there. So we're not too concerned about those services. For the telemetry and tracking and ranging, so there's already some capacity on the islands. The teleport in Santa Maria already tracks everything that comes out of Kourou. It tracks emissions from New Zealand with the Electron rocket. We're going to use part of that capacity to track whatever comes out of Santa Maria, but also, again, the final re-entry orbits that are required. We are installing more capacity, including S-band interferometry that will serve as a radar. So we're trying to dispense with the C-band. And we'll also have passive radar as well eventually in the future. One thing that we're leveraging is also the capacity that the European Space Agency is installing on the island to support the Space Rider mission. So again, more telemetry, flight termination system, video tracking, and all that is being installed on the island in the next 2-3 years. It's already planned. So there's a roadmap that is quite aggressive for us. But at the end of 2027, the site needs to be ready. The island needs to be ready to welcome Space Rider, and this includes all the infrastructure around the landing site, plus all the telemetry, tracking, ranging, and all of that for the mission as well, including video tracking and. So this is being funded again through the European Space Agency, but also with our own procurement for some of the systems that we need to provide to support our customers. SpaceForest, however, they're bringing their own result system. I think you are aware of what I mean. So they have their own system. We actually had to support licensing for the frequencies that they're using, which were not necessarily compatible, but that's fine.
Okay, so time is going fast, so I don't know if you have time for
I'm fine. I'm all yours.
Okay, nice. So let's go.
In terms of this communication capability, do you have any specific requirements for the launchers to be able to essentially access all of these new devices that you're installing? That's one question. And
there are some standards there. Yeah.
Okay. In terms of boats, are you gonna rent boats from locals? That's the business case?
Yes.
Okay, so, but they aren't owned by the launchers nor Spaceport. They are just there to be rented, right?
No. So they have their own activity. I mean, think about numbers.
Yeah.
So think about numbers. I'm not going to buy a boat to support 2 missions a year. Right?
Yeah, I mean, from the business standpoint, it's really efficient, and that's what I was asking for. Like, are you planning to buy your own boats, or are you just renting them for a couple of days for the launch sessions?
For now, it doesn't make sense to buy. There's an operational cost that I don't want to have. Plus, I mean, we're renting boats from people that are doing their own daily activities. And actually, with these maritime touristic attraction boats, they do whale watching, etc. Coming with us on the day that we launch actually makes more sense to them in terms of generating return, because if we're launching, probably they have a no-go zone and they have to cancel a trip. I don't know. So we're working in partnership with them. This has to do with the local sustainability and insertion in the community. Otherwise, we will not be sustainable as a community, as a business, and as a region as well. So this interaction is important to also generate value for the island. So if I have a boat and if I buy a boat that is going to be stopped, that is going to be in the harbor for like 360 days, and I'll use it for 5 days a year, that's not rentable.
Yeah.
For the first
really
question, So for the first question, it's not a case by case. We are assessing case by case because we have to tune frequencies and guarantee that the frequencies are available and register for our usage. And this is the exercise we've done with SpaceForest, for instance. But there are standards, so you're using communication standards and things that. So in principle, we should be interoperable with most of them. And if not, then we'll probably have to make some adjustments on either side.
Okay, nice.
This sounds like a wonderful example of cooperation between like the spaceport and the community, which is very nice. But right now I will combine a couple of next questions and go to the academic side of maybe of launches. Do you see like the spaceport becoming another site for students or academic launches for student teams or maybe even competitions? And in the future, some scientific students satellite launches on
Yes
small
and yes.
launchers?
Yes
and
and yes.
then how are you going to facilitate the law and license part of that? Because student rockets and student teams do not have that power to force some legal matters if they want to launch something.
Okay, so 3 good questions, and I understand where you're coming from. So you are aware that there's a competition in Portugal already, right? The EuRoC competition is held every...
Yeah, that was my question.
And
when can we expect EuRoC on Azores?
So there are some challenges to do that, okay? And it's not because of the site not being available. It has to do mostly with the recovery. Everything else is actually easier in the Azores than it is in Santa Margarida. Why? Because I can give you as many launch windows as you need. I'm not constrained in terms of altitude. I'm not constrained in terms of downrange, but I am constrained. I will not recover the rocket on land, which means that all the rockets that are launched in the Azores will have to have a recovery system that will be allowing them to be recovered on water. So that's the first challenge. The second challenge is logistics, in terms of having 25 teams with all sorts of rockets and motors and engines on the island. It's not easy to manage from a logistics perspective. So we need to accommodate that. However, I can tell you that we've been challenged to assess that by the Portuguese Space Agency. They would be the organizers, not us. We would be the hosts. But that is something that's being discussed. I cannot promise you it's going to happen anytime soon, but it's something that's being assessed.
Okay.
The licensing issue, the Portuguese regulation is actually pretty flexible. So the problem with licensing is to do with liability, as I mentioned. So if someone accepts the liability, in the EuRoC case, it's the Portuguese Space Agency that accepts that liability, then fine. So it's more about knowing who is responsible if something goes wrong, and if the rocket that's launched from Santa Maria hits a fisherman or a boat or a whale or whatever. So this is the typically the considerations that you have to have. An operation in the military range like the EuRoC strips away some of that liability issues because the military controls the site, which means it minimizes impact on insurance. But it's something that is being thought through, and maybe I think the challenge that the agency said was, what about a suborbital EuRoC?
Okay.
You would go to the site. You would go to the site if you're actually launching above, I don't know, 80K, Kármán line, whatever.
Yeah, so teams probably like high-end from Germany, which is like the students section from which High Impulse basically grew up.
So that's a good example, because we've been approached by those teams already. Then there's, I think, if my memory serves me right, I think it's about 4 that are trying to break the 100K record for first.
Yeah, and so are we. So next question is, what are the costs of launching with you guys?
It depends. That's a straightforward answer. You can be anything from 50K to 500K. Okay.
Okay.
We've done, I can tell you, and this is being completely honest and open about it, we've quoted iHand for 50, we quoted TUVAR for 75. And why? Because the different requests, different requirements, different service that they need. And we're providing everything. So that goes from getting everything on the island. So logistics, it's on us, door-to-door container. So you'll get a container, put everything in there, we'll pick it up, deliver it to Santa Maria, we'll handle it on site, and then send stuff back to you. And why? Because we will deal with import as well. We will deal with customs, we'll deal with other things. So we prefer to rely on our logistics partners to do that. The second thing that we can handle, this is an option, is things like lodging, traveling, and accommodation on the island. So you deal with the flights yourselves, but we can rent houses or put you in a hotel, whatever. So there are some options to handle. And then there's the licensing part that we'll handle. We will need some inputs from you in terms of what the rocket will look like, what's the safety case. And the license and any operation like this will require safety case for the rocket. And the safety case means what is the trajectory, how stable it is, does it need a flight termination system, why, is it guided, is it aerostabilized, is it, what are the control mechanisms, what if something breaks, what happens if trajectory goes wrong, or so safety analysis will have to be assessed, and there's a cost to do that as well. Typically, what we do is that the contract will then have a breakpoint after that analysis. So either does it fit or it doesn't fit, or we propose some changes. So it is possible. I cannot provide a quote without knowing a bit more details about what your operation would look like.
Okay.
But it sounds very promising compared to other spaceports like S-Range or Event.
I mean, we believe we can turn it around in roughly a month from the contract signature.
Well, that's nice.
The limitation is typically getting everything on the island, which, depending on where you are in Europe, but from Poland, I think I would say 6 weeks to be on a safe side. And there are, I think, the easiest option is to come on the road to Lisbon and then on board a ship, or you can ship it already in Poland. But I think the easiest and cheapest. But our logistics partners will handle that.
We should ask SpaceForest to bring us with them, maybe.
Could be. I think they are looking.
I'm joking.
No. But they are actually. I think they're. I mean, we pressed in terms of timetable, so I think they're also looking at other options. But I'm not going to go into details.
Okay. Do you also plan to do some military exercises, or are you open to military stuff on your range?
Simple answer is yes.
Yeah. Okay.
No, I'm not going to go into details on that.
Yeah, simple question, simple answer.
Okay, and lastly, I want to ask you about the local conditions, like the weather or other atmospheric basically stuff, because we know, in S-Range there is cold and sometimes it rains or maybe there's snow. But for you on Azores, what is the weather like in there?
Minimum temperature all year round is 15. Maximum temperature all year round is 25. So Perfect. In between 15 and 25, we're there. There may be one or two outliers in the whole year. For student rockets and for the type of missions that I believe you would bring, I would recommend spring, so somewhere between March and May. You may still have some winds. Summer is nice. So June is nice. Summer, July and August are more expensive, but also could be a bit windier. And then you have September, October, which tend to be perfect. Wind changes a bit in the island. It's middle of the Azores, middle of the Atlantic, so you do have variable wind conditions. But if you plan a campaign for a week, I'm sure you'll get at least 2 flyable days in the year. In any week in the year. It's very rare that you have 5 or 6 days in a row without an opportunity to fly. We have some, I would say, and we can share environmental data or weather data, but we have some, and this is part of the safety case. The analysis that needs to be done is what is the, I would say, wind acceptance of the vehicle, right? So what are the margins that your vehicle could fly in terms of wind conditions, particularly in higher altitudes as well. And we can provide some sample data. But I can tell you is that the weather is normally better than Undoya, normally better than S-Range. Sometimes it rains, but if it rains and you wait 15 minutes and it's not raining again. So
okay.
You can have
Okay, so
Yes.
basically there's no way for suborbital orbital students launches to basically go for a month without a window. So you're basically from arriving to the island, getting ready, we have 90% chance to launch within a week, yeah?
within a week. Yes, of course. If you're ready, then you can launch. I mean, as I said, if it's not good today, I'm sure there's a window tomorrow. Within a week, 80%, 90%, I put probably even higher. 7 days. Unless you're in the middle of winter, and okay, tougher. I mean, they had a very rough winter. January, February was rough this year, but it was also an outlier, like the heat wave in Europe at the moment. But in springtime, in autumn, within a week you fly. You have multiple. You just have to be
Okay.
ready. Okay? And we know how students are. I've sponsored EuRoC since the very inception in 2020, and sometimes you guys are not ready. So there's a window, and
We know this one.
It happens a lot.
So actually, last question based on EuRoC experience. How do you handle in these conditions, like weather conditions? It's so sunny, it's so hot. Do you have any issues with self-pressurizing systems?
So this is one of the reasons why with EuRoC is happening in October, not in August or
Yeah,
July.
that's just my question. Like, how does
That's-
weather affect flying conditions with those gases?
That's the first thing. We actually had because the first edition was 2020, and between 2020 and 2025, those 6 editions, you had very warm weeks, very cold weeks, very rainy weeks, and very foggy weeks. But yeah, I mean, it depends on the system, but you need to be careful. But yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I do not expect in October temperatures to go above 28 in Santa Maria.
We wouldn't expect as well, but we got some issues in Europe, so that's why I'm asking.
Probably you know that better than I do.
Yeah, okay. I think this time we have to unfortunately end this interview.
Yes, Bruno.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for your time. It was a great interview. Really,
It was amazing. Great
I
insight.
I mean, I'm happy, and I think I've told you. How do you pronounce your name? Slavomir. Slavomir. Okay. So apologies for not knowing it. But I mean, I'm happy that we do a lot of outreach with students. We do a lot of work with students. We sponsor. I'm not going to offer to sponsor another team because I already sponsored too many teams in EuRoC. But we do want to work with students, and we do welcome students on the site. So this is why I'm saying that we can surely do a launch campaign that is basically you bring your stuff, we charge the cost. Will not charge any overheads or anything, which is basically our time to handle you and provide you the all the logistics that's required. So this is. I know it's a lot, but that lot for students, like 50K for students, is a lot. I understand that, but
it sure is. Yeah.
But it's the cost of getting the stuff. I mean, I would say 90% of that is the stuff you spend on logistics and all that. So it's not cheap to fly in the Azores, and it's not cheap to fly in the Azores because it's not cheap to get there. There are some logistics overheads, of course, and I'm well aware of that. But I'm happy to have to entertain a conversation with you guys and try to see where we can help. We're not that is kind of the only way I can envisage at the moment, trying to sponsor teams like yourselves, and you mentioned a couple of them, to try to test these technologies and be the future of what is spacefaring in Europe. So.
Okay, so thank you for your time again, and have a nice weekend.
You too, and apologies for being so late on a Friday, but it's been a very long month already, and it's not over yet.
No problem.
No problem.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Enjoy.
Thank you very much.
Bye bye.